All right. So today we're going to dive into the world of Henry Huang.
Mhm.
And I think this one's really going to be interesting for people because on the surface,
Right.
he's young, killing it in real estate in New York City.
Mm.
But it's really the way he thinks, the way he approaches life that I think is going to resonate with people.
It's almost philosophical.
Yeah, and I
Oh,
think a
right.
lot, a lot of people, they'll hear these stories and say like, "Oh, look at this guy. He's,
Right.
20 something years old and doing all this stuff," but it's really about how we got there.
Yeah.
That I think is the important part.
Yeah, and what's so interesting about Henry is that he's not just successful, he's actually taken the time to deconstruct why he makes certain choices and,
Mhm.
analyze his own thinking. And I think that's really rare, actually at
Yeah.
that age.
Especially in like the world that he's in, right? I mean, New York City real estate, like that's
It's like you said, a pressure cooker.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and to be so
And
self-aware
thoughtful. That's
and
right.
in that environment
Yeah.
is uh is unusual to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's start at the beginning. So Henry's childhood, I mean, on the surface, pretty standard. I mean, he grew up in suburban Boston immigrant parents, like that whole
Yeah.
kind of classic story.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this really interesting curveball, and that is that when he was a toddler,
Right.
he actually lived in China with his grandparents for 2 years.
Wow.
And I don't know if I mean, that's not something you hear every day.
No, not at all.
And to think about being like, 2 years old and basically dropped into
Right.
this
A totally different world.
totally different world. And
And just soaking it up like a sponge, at
yeah,
that age.
yeah. And it wasn't just like he wasn't just there visiting. It was like full on, living with them,
Right? Full immersion.
immersed in the culture and everything.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to overlook the impact of those early experiences.
Sure.
But for him, it's like that really shaped who he is,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and he even picked up like a regional dialect from his grandparents.
Wow.
Just from being around them. Never even like went to like, Chinese school or anything.
That's
So
incredible.
it's like talk about a natural learner.
That's amazing. Yeah, that just speaks to this adaptability
Yeah.
that you see throughout his life. That
Yeah.
that early experience, I think, really highlights how our brains are wired for connection
Right.
and how quickly we can pick things up when we're immersed in a new environment.
It's like the difference between studying a map and like actually getting lost in a city.
Isn't it?
One is like you're
Yeah.
getting like this like
Surface level.
surface understanding, but the other one's like rewiring your
Exactly.
internal compass.
You're living it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about childcare. I mean, he was absorbing
Right.
a completely different culture during those formative years.
Mm-hmm.
And it clearly had a profound impact on his worldview
Yeah.
and his natural openness
Yeah.
to new experiences.
Okay, so we've got this like foundation of cultural fluency and like a brain that's like wired for adaptability. Let's fast forward to high school.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, classic Henry, good student, ambitious, like all the AP classes you can handle.
Right.
But then we get to this story about his volunteering experience, and this is where
Yeah,
things get interesting.
Intrigue.
Yeah. So we left off with Henry, this driven high school kid, about to embark on this unusual volunteering experience.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, so picture this, like he decides to volunteer and not just like, a few hours here and there.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking 200 hours at a hospital.
Wow.
Unpaid.
Okay.
200 hours unpaid. And it's like, at first glance, you're like, what was he thinking,
Like, was this like what high school
Some
kid?
kind of requirement.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like, what was this like court ordered or something? But no, he chose this.
Wow.
And it really speaks to like this drive that he has to kind of like test things out for himself.
Right. It's like that hands-on mentality.
Exactly.
Instead of just like reading about it in a book or,
Yeah.
hearing about it from someone who's like, I'm going to go experience it.
Yeah. Hey, remember his parents were like, big on education.
Mm-hmm.
Classic immigrant story. Like, you're going to work hard. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to make us proud.
Right, right.
And for a while there, he thought that was going to be his path.
Okay. Oh.
But instead of just like, going through the motions, he's like, I'm going to go see what this is really about.
And he really dove in head first. Then 200 hours is a serious commitment.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for a high school student.
Yeah. And get this. He chose to volunteer at the same hospital where he was born.
Wow. Talk about a full circle moment.
I know, right?
Like he's going back to his roots.
It's like he's trying to understand his own story in a deeper way.
Exactly.
But 200 hours, that's a lot of time to just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a doctor.
Exactly. So what did he learn from that?
Well, that's the thing. It's like he learned a really valuable lesson, and I think it's a lesson that a lot of us could benefit from. And that is like, opinions are valuable, right? But firsthand experience, that's where the real truth lies.
Yeah, you got to test things out for yourself.
Because it turns out the hospital environment wasn't for him.
Interesting.
But can you imagine if he had never taken that leap?
Right.
If he'd never tested that assumption.
You might have spent years going down a path that wasn't right for him.
Exactly.
Just because of, what he thought he should do.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, right?
Absolutely.
It's so easy to get caught up in what we think we should do, what other people expect of us.
The expectations of our families, our friends.
Yeah, and Henry's story is like this really powerful reminder that it's okay to question.
Yes.
To explore, to get our hands dirty and figure out like what truly resonates with us.
100%. And it's not just about figuring out what we don't want.
Right.
It's about actively seeking out experiences that will shape our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And that brings us to like another, I think, really pivotal chapter in Henry's life, which is college. He ends up at NYU.
Oh, wow.
In the heart of New York City.
Big Apple.
During the peak of COVID.
Wow.
Talk about a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, what a time to be in New York City.
New York City, like land of opportunity, dreams being made.
Right.
And also pandemics, apparently.
Well, you're right.
But even more tumultuous than like the state of the world was actually what was happening in Henry's personal life at the time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, this is where I think a lot of people would have just like crumbled.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So he's a young guy, right? Navigating a new city and a new school.
Right.
And then, boom, his parents drop the bomb that they're getting a divorce.
Oh, wow.
All while he's living at home.
Oh, no.
With them and his younger siblings.
So it's like a pressure cooker in a pressure cooker.
Talk about a pressure cooker, right? Imagine the weight of that, trying to focus on your own life while your family's going through this major upheaval.
Yeah, that's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone just starting their adult life.
And this is where I think Henry's ability to not just survive, but thrive in the face of adversity really shines through.
Okay, so how does he do it?
Well, instead of letting the stress paralyze him, he does something really interesting. He channels all of his energy into what matters most, his family.
His family.
Yeah. It's easy to say like, oh, just focus on family.
Right.
But what Henry did was so much more than that.
Okay.
It was like this laser focus on creating stability for himself and for his siblings.
Yeah, and that's where this like really powerful belief comes in.
Okay.
That money equals stability.
Right.
And I know that might sound a little,
Yeah, a little mercenary. Yeah.
But it wasn't about greed or anything like that. It was about responsibility.
Exactly. He felt this huge weight of responsibility to be there for his family.
To provide.
Yeah.
To step up.
Right. And I think it's in this moment of intense pressure that we start to see those entrepreneurial seeds, really take root.
Yeah, and this is where I think the role of mentors becomes really, really important.
Okay.
Because, we talked about how Henry initially kind of dismissed his parents' advice a little bit.
Right. He was like, I know better.
Yeah, he was young, caught up in the hustle culture.
Yeah, the get-rich-quick allure.
Almost dropped out of college to become a real estate agent.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you see these two different approaches from his parents.
His dad was very direct, like, don't be an idiot, stay in school.
Right.
But his mom, she used this different tactic.
Okay.
She listened. She really listened to his dreams, to his anxieties.
Okay.
And kind of gently guided him to his own realization that maybe dropping out wasn't the best move.
Wow, so she really knew how to approach him.
Exactly. And then enters Mitchell, who becomes this, like, pivotal mentor in Henry's life.
Okay.
And Mitchell teaches him about the power of communication and not just talking, but really listening.
Right.
Understanding people's needs.
Their motivation.
Which, by the way, pretty valuable skills in any field, not just real estate.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing about Mitchell. He came from a sales background. Not exactly where you'd expect to find, like, a life coach, right?
Right. Not your typical mentor.
But it just goes to show you that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places.
Absolutely.
Right? That even skills that are traditionally associated with, like, selling
Right.
can be applied to personal growth.
100%. It's about connecting with people,
Exactly.
building relationships.
So, speaking of different worlds,
Okay.
let's talk about Henry's current stomping grounds.
Yeah.
The world of commercial real estate.
Okay.
Now, this isn't just like, selling houses.
No, it's a whole different ballgame.
It's a whole other level, and Henry's thriving in it.
So what does he actually do?
He's working with investors, he's managing properties,
Wow.
dealing with some pretty big money, and he got his start, believe it or not, through student clubs and networking events.
Really?
Yeah.
So he was like networking his way to the top?
He was meeting CEOs of major companies while,
Wow.
we were all just trying to figure out,
Ramen doogles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to this theme of mentorship,
Mm-hmm.
because those opportunities only came about because he was willing to put himself out there.
Right. Just be open.
Yeah, to connect with people from all walks of life.
Yeah, and be genuinely curious.
Exactly.
Ask questions.
But, with all this talk of, networking and ambition,
Right.
Henry leaves us with this really interesting piece of advice.
Okay.
He says, spend more time alone.
Alone.
Yeah, really carve out time for solitude, away from all the noise and distraction.
So what is he actually suggesting people do?
He uses this great analogy.
Okay.
He talks about the college application process.
Mm-hmm.
All that pressure to get good grades, extracurriculars, fit this perfect mold.
Right, right.
He's saying, what if we stepped off that treadmill for a second
Yeah.
and just asked ourselves,
Yeah.
what do I really want?
It makes me come alive.
Exactly.
It's like we're all on this treadmill,
Yeah.
and we don't even know why.
And sometimes you just got to step off
Take a break.
and look around.
Yeah.
So that's Henry Huang.
It's amazing.
Achieved incredible success at a young age, but more importantly, he's done it on his own terms.
Yeah, he found his own path.
Driven by this deep sense of purpose and this relentless curiosity to understand himself
And the world around him.
and the world around him.
I love that.
So the question is, what will you do differently having heard his story?